So I came here 16 years ago, and I never really left, which means it must be a pretty good community. But just thank you so much for everyone for coming out, and thank you to everyone who's organized this festival, especially Teresa Munoz. 3 days of poetry has just been brilliant. I'll go ahead and read now from my debut collection, Ghost River. Rainier. I'm in love with this mountain that all summer long threatens to kill my father. Swallow him in the pale blue Emmons, crush him beneath an avalanche, or send him sliding down the Couts, his crampons failing on pre-dawn ice. This mountain I love will one day knock on the door of my mother's home, unearth the graves of my relatives, and carry hyacinths and coffins down the Duwamish out into the Sound. And as Linda said, I'm from Washington State, which is on the sort of Pacific Northwest area of America. And it's a pretty wild place still, if wild places still exist. Mountains and forests and water, glaciers, rivers, lakes, the sort of inland sound. And so I feel the heart of that place is really, really water, bodies of water. At night, when I am caught in the near dark, and I hear the neighbors arguing, I also smell the tar of the pier, Skid Row, exhaust from the viaduct. Green water blooms with jellyfish and bright anemones. I am trying to remember the kelp forests, but I am not here because I am on the ferry. The distance does not erase the land we've left, but makes it visible. Hills that rise beyond hills, tiers of houses, the shoreline unwound. If I were to name the water I look across, but I'm not interested in names as the sun dips behind the islands. I am breaking in my boots and thinking of pain and air and ice. My father guides me over the mouth of the crevasse, and I wonder if my mother felt robbed of the air when he left. From the summit, the land beneath me is a map. This is the world. Some friend's parents' minivan, a fat stretch of I-5, summer heat in the parking lot, the cold descent into skunk cabbage bogs, followed by that driftwood tang. I sleepwalk into rivers overspilling their banks, white foam rising from the falls, a silver-lit ocean where my grandfather scatters ash. I suppose I've always been interested in what's below us. But after my mom's mom died and we buried her, it became this sort of other sort of sense of what was down there, a sort of strange spiritual sense. And it made me start thinking more about the aquifer that's below where we grew up and from which we all get our drinking water. And that really sort of mysterious sense of having these sort of dark lakes, as it were, beneath our feet. And so I started to sort of seek out information about it. And the footnotes in the title poem, Ghost River, come from a document that dealt with both the geologic conditions which made the aquifer possible, but also its sort of planning and protection around it, especially given that there had been a quite severe period of drought, sort of from the 80s to the 90s when this document was produced, which of course this period of drought continues. Ghost River. Aquifer. A sung prayer which uses liturgical texts by the Italian Dominican theologian and philosopher Thomas Aquinas. What is faith, if not the belief in water we cannot see? We drink from the hosepipe a mouthful of darkness. So that's what the center of the earth tastes like. Aquifer, a subterranean repository. Beneath the homestead of my ancestors, the timed black sauna and fruit trees, the apartment complexes, the strip malls, the DMV and high school, beneath the Kmart and the Walmart, Valley Highway and Dairy Queen, beneath the cornfields and the lettuce, cabbages and broccoli, beneath the fertilizer, pesticides, cattle pens and milk barn, beneath Salal and Douglas fir, cedar and mycelium, kissing the underbelly of Big Seuss and Sawyer, there are ghost rivers from which we all drink. There is deeper water yet. Aquifer, to repress or withhold. She will not drink. She dreams black water. Imagine a glass, half empty, half. What is data that deals in thirst? Whose currency is water? Aquifer, the malign shadow that sometimes appears in scans. We are told that our hearts should be glad. Palm to palm with black water, she prays. Holy, holy, holy. What shall I call her? Grandmother, Ghost River? Ghost River, grandmother, is it you I taste in this glass? Aquifer, to gather the unconsolidated possessions of the deceased. What remains are gloves, cut glass necklaces, handkerchiefs, a clock, pantyhose. Aquifer, the small font at the entrance or exit of a church. She said, come. Each unconsolidated sediment is welcome here. The sediments came and fell upon their knees to wash her feet. Linda gave such a wonderful introduction to the collection. So thank you so much. And thank you for introducing the central sequence, the George Vancouver poems, which I still think, where did those come from? But I know where they came from. I had quite a difficult birth, and I was over in the hospital across the road, so we're still at this time, 5 years ago, waiting to get home. And what we did to amuse ourselves is to look up things that had happened on the day she was born, so throughout history. And one of them was that George Vancouver, the explorer who's at the center of this, had cited and named Mount Rainier, which of course is a major feature where I'm from. And it just sparked a lot of questions in my mind about language and about names and about the fact that I couldn't think of home without thinking about George Vancouver's words and his language, and he was everywhere. The Puget Sound, Mount Rainier, Mount Baker, Bellingham Bay, the sort of unnamed water that I'm looking across in that other poem, and so George became a temporary obsession, and so this sequence is dealing with George, and I'll just read a few poems from it. Theoretical geographers. A slow leak is filling George Vancouver's left boot. Rain, impenetrable, unnavigable, endless rain. Among his men, the pretended discoveries of DeFuca and DeFonte have been revived. He retires to his cabin, childhood, Kingsland. In this wooden room, all he can see has been discovered. Nothing left but to exist in the bleak, small space that knowing creates. Theoretical geographers and their Northwest Passage nonsense. Not a whiff of estuary on the wind. What of his laborious and enterprising exertions, pulled from history with one inglorious suck? DeFuca, DeFonte, the tedious knock against the hull. And I suppose one of the reasons he was there to both chart and name and claim territory and settle some land disputes was the search for the Northwest Passage, which of course didn't exist. And he was very pleased that it didn't, because he didn't think it did in the first place. But in addition to the sort of the names of, I suppose, land formations and bodies of water, another consequence of that expedition was the plants also retained some of the names from the voyage. And the Douglas fir, which is the massive conifer, which is everywhere, where I'm from. The Latin name is Sudasuga menzizi, which comes from Archibald Menzies, who was sort of responsible for its categorization. Sudasuga menzizi. Even as the sun cuts through impenetrable cloud to illuminate the white wig of George Vancouver, my attention is on the man and the undergrowth, the man becoming tree. To rest my hand on his back and feel the vigor of his inhalation is to know the sweetness of pitch, its golden ooze, crystalline honey. Black hills plunging to black water, I confuse his pulse with the forest's heart. I tell him to empty his pockets. Cloth is a poor shroud for the seed. He asks if I know the saying, not every man is a puzzle, but every puzzle is a man. Black hills beyond black hills. He tells me it is not theft to take what is freely given. Find a man who did not envy the crane that strode with lordly step over the land without a possessor. Colchian. George Vancouver lifts his face to the sun. The weather is fine. His cock is hard for the very land from which his men gather roses, gooseberries, and rest sea-wearied bodies on luxuriant grasses. No Eve to scupper their conquest of this pleasure ground, no raging God to throw them out. This shall be his, and this shall be his. With Adamic candor, he titles the presiding mountain after 3rd Lieutenant Baker. But there is brimstone in the bead of magma beneath its white and placid dome. He dreams a cold hand over his mouth. Passage. George, didn't your knees get sore praying for mercy and fresh water? I am sore from the hands that could not right the ship inside me. If you knew anything about birth, you would know the passage I thought was not so different. Far from motherhood's shore, I held my breath and waited for your arrive and give name to something. Who can I blame? I drown again and again. And I'll just close with a couple poems from the final section of the book. And I suppose all of us have unusual experiences during the pandemic, and one of those was that, the idea of home became so utterly distant because all air travel had ceased, and my grandmother died at the very start, and there was just no way to get back. Northwest Passage. My sister places a handful of my grandmother's ashes in a cedar box. On the box are horses. She dreams of horses, dreams of grandmother opening the box the way flames open a roof. I've seen trees erupt with manes of fire. I've seen hillsides gallop towards rivers. Stay a while. I would like us to ride the horses the way I imagine my grandmother rode through the young valley. There are no freeways, no car lots. The drive-in is coming, but a long way off. If there is only one fence, it is easier to jump. Picture my grandmother as a horse without a rider, a horse as black as her hair, black as the fossil in the spare room they unearthed as they blasted the hills to make way for the interstate. The smell of dynamite is in the air, and at the mouth of the tunnel she gallops through. If I am using you to delay the grief that I know is coming, what happens when we part? Imagine us cresting Chinook Pass to greet the dry breeze of Yakima County. The dark forests roll until dissolved by sage, beyond the sage juniper, beyond the juniper grasses, and beyond the grasses, mountains and rivers and forests and mountains and rivers, and America is nothing if not longing. The valley a riparian marsh uninterrupted by the cornfields, the river snaking loose through the cattails, the call of the red-winged blackbird. Too far back. Knowledge erases itself the way a tree may burn from the inside, leaving nothing more than a hollow trunk. I no longer know if I set out to write about arrivals or departures, or why I assumed there was any difference. It doesn't matter if the clouds we kick up are dust or ash, or if it was with you that I ride, or if I'm seated behind my grandmother in the old Ford, and we are driving to where they drove the final spike of the Transcontinental Railroad. I see a bald field, and in the distance, two tracks merging. And my final poem, and thank you so much for listening. Tectonics. The argument had something to do with tectonic plates, the way they move and how, but so much time spent working from memory means I've forgotten the point. And the subduction zone now has no name, but exists as a dropping off point, not far from where I may have looked once when waking to sea stacks crowned with mist and wave beating the shore, or here now at the front gate of a small brick nursery. A number of years ago, I watched two children put together a puzzle. I held one piece, uncertain of when it all became so difficult. If all new thinking is about loss, perhaps that is why these part memories return as I let go of her hand. Our days together belonging now in a past that until yesterday was the present. I used to believe the purpose of life was movement. I crossed oceans, continents. I never stopped to consider the mountain's stillness, only its power. Old earth rising as new. Thank you so much.